All students benefit from a diverse group of teachers.
Did you know that research shows that when gifted and talented classes are taught by Black teachers, that Black students are much more likely to be assigned to those classes?
Educators of color also understand the importance of teaching their students about their racial identity and their history.
We need teachers that look like me. We need you.
We need you.
We need you.
We need you.
Good evening and welcome to the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy Community Forum Series. Real talk on recruiting, sustaining, and retaining male educators of color, why it matters, and how to do it right. My name is Shelley Rouser. I serve as the Chair for Education Programs at Delaware State University and as a committee member for the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy, and it is my pleasure on behalf of the Center to host this month's Monday series. The Center was created to ensure that Black and Brown children living in the city of Wilmington would no longer remain the recipients of historical educational inequities and inequalities and injustices that have continued to hinder their educational, personal, and professional success. You may ask yourself, why was the center formed and how are we distinctive among the range of organizations who are pushing for transformation of our public education system? The Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy, WCEEP, was created to ensure that Black and Brown children living in the city of Wilmington will no longer be harmed by poor educational experiences. The crises our students face today are in large part the result of inequities and unresolved injustices carried on their backs for generations. Long before Zoom classrooms, a student's race and zip code have been predictors of how likely they are to attend preschool, to be taught by teachers who look like them, to have experienced teachers, to graduate, or even to face disciplinary action, expulsion, be arrested, or enter into the criminal justice system. The center emerged from the sustainable efforts of the Wilmington Education Strategies think tank, WEST. And WEST is a group of private citizens, nonprofit executives, parents, government leaders, and has been contributing to the education landscape for more than 6 years. Our core strategies are advocacy, research, and community organizing. In partnership with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, some of our accomplishments include commissioning research from Edunomics at Georgetown University. That helps substantiate that there are stark public school financial inequities. This research helped inform the formation of Delawareans for Educational Opportunities. And recently, Delawareans for Educational Opportunities negotiated a court-mediated settlement regarding the statewide public funding system. We've hosted focus groups with parents, students, and teachers and administrators on COVID-19's impact, virtual learning, and the best use of the Federal CARES Act funds. Continued fundraising efforts secured grants from the Wilmington City Council, Newcastle County Government, and Wilmington Office of Mayor. And these monthly Monday conversations, and a community organizing training that will launch in April, and you can visit our website to learn more about that. 2020 has shined a spotlight on the many roles public schools play as safe houses, food banks, health and social service centers, and polling places. Public schools are the centerpiece of a new vision for equity in our ecosystem. Today, our students face diverse obstacles in and outside of the classroom, and that's been vocalized, but far too long remain unchallenged. With the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy, students have a platform to amplify their voices and efforts to access to sustainable educational learning opportunities. And parents and community members have an extended reach to connect with educational and organizational leaders to gain knowledge and access to resources to put academic success in the hands of their young learners. Through our core areas of advocacy, community organizing, and research, the Wilmington Center for Education, Equity, and Policy will ensure that students and educational entities of the City of Wilmington will have access to top-notch services benefiting the full range of student potential, needs, and interests, and all in the service of their sustained success. This evening's session, Real Talk on Recruiting, Sustaining, and Retaining Male Educators of Color, Why It Matters and How to Do It Right, focuses our attention on the urgent topic of diversifying the educational workforce for racial and linguistic equity. We invite you to engage in the conversation by plugging in your questions and your comments inside the chat, and members of the committee will be connecting with you there. Stick around for our Q&A segment at the end of the session. Your active engagement during and after this session is integral. If you're a parent, if you are a student, if you're an educator, if you are a concerned member of the community, if you are a government official, we want to hear from you. And now let's get to our guest panelists. Our guest panelists this evening include Darrell Green, Superintendent, Red Clay Consolidated School District. Omar Rodriguez, teacher, West Middle School, North Carolina, also a graduate student in the TESOL program at Delaware State University. Wade Inge, physical education teacher candidate, Delaware State University. Dr. Roderick Carey, professor, University of Delaware. Ernest Blackwell, CEO, Equity and Beyond. Dr. Shanta Reynolds, principal, St. George's Technical High School, Newcastle County Votech School District. In a moment, we will put the spotlight on our guest panelists who will share their diverse perspectives on strategies to create school cultures that attract and retain Black and brown men in the classroom. And we will engage in a unique barbershop-style dialogue. But first, I welcome Dr. Jack Perry, partner, the New Teachers Project. The session facilitator for our dialogue this evening. You have read Dr. Perry's bio, and now without further ado, let's get started. Jack, please set the stage for us, and before we hear from the panelists, please share your insights on this important topic and why it's so urgent for our audience to stay fully tuned in for the next 80 minutes.
Thank you, Shelly. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all tonight. So why are we here? All students need to be exposed to the brilliance and diversity of Black teachers, Latino teachers, and other teachers of color. Black and Latino students specifically need teachers that look like them because of the institutional and systemic racism they encounter in schools, as well as in other areas of their life. And studies consistently show that Black and Latino students with teachers of the same race are less likely to be suspended, more likely to be referred to gifted programs, more likely to complete high school and go on to college, and are likely to build more authentic relationships, which, guess what, just may encourage that Black or brown boy or girl to aspire to be a teacher themselves one day. So what's the problem? The problem is, nationally, 53% of students are people of color, yet 80% of teachers are white. And 40% of public schools don't have a single teacher of color. In Delaware, 56% of our students identify as students of color, while 83% of teachers are white. That number was 85% 5 years ago. And teachers of color are less likely than white teachers to stay at the same school after 2 years, which speaks to the lack of care and development they receive and results in burnout. So what about Black and Latino men? That's who we are here to talk about tonight. We know nationally that just 2%, yes, 2% of Black men are teachers, and 2% of Latino men are teachers. So let's talk about it, fellas. Let's kick this off with your teacher story. Why did you decide to teach?
I can jump in. So good evening, everyone. I decided to teach because I was an average student, right? And I struggled to comprehend content, struggled to stay engaged. And luckily, I was blessed to have parents that had the time and had the resources to invest in tutors and invest in programs. But I had friends that didn't have that same opportunity, and they struggled with the same issues. So I wanted to be an educator because I wanted to provide the support that's needed in order for all students to succeed in the classroom without having additional resources and having to have, tutors and so forth. Being able to provide that impactful experience during the class period, during the class time. Also, I wanted to be able to deliver relevant content. And, my major was social studies, and I wanted to make sure that our history was being taught in the classroom. So one of the reasons, again, why I wanted to be an educator, or my journey to education, was to serve all those students that weren't being served, and also to engage our students in our history.
Appreciate hearing from you on that. Brothers,
Jack,
why did you decide to teach?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think it's similar to what Shanta said. I was fortunate enough to have had Black educators in my life, from being a Head Start baby to, through my high school years growing up in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So that adage that it takes a community, I can think of, Miss Charlene DeShields, who was my second grade teacher, Dr. Askew, who was a school counselor when I was in sixth grade, Mr. Walker, who was my world history teacher in high school. So having Black educators kind of pour and instill in me the importance of teaching and the value in teaching. They saw something in me that when I had the opportunity to aspire to earn scholarships through athletics, that they led me to see education as a prospective area of interest in terms of a major. And then when I got to the University of Delaware, where I received both my undergraduate and master's level degree, I met a gentleman by the name of Jim Shaw, who worked in the Aspire program, which was a program that the University of Delaware had geared specifically for students of color who were in the education and major. Really helped support that and facilitated it. And as I got into education, having school leaders such as Maurice Pritchett and others within the public education system really advocate and support me is kind of my education story and how I got into teaching.
I can jump in here. I want to echo what Dr. Reynolds and Superintendent Green said. A lot of my formation absolutely came from being in school programs, being inspired by teachers. But I want to push it in a different direction. I didn't really have a lot of teachers that looked like me growing up. I didn't actually have my first Black male teacher until I was in graduate school at Harvard. Chuck Willie was my first Black male teacher, if you can believe it. Before that, my first Black teacher was Deborah Broadnex at St. Anthony's in second grade. But I had plenty of educators. Now let me reframe that. So I went to school, after school care. I was in the Walnut Street YMCA, and there were tons of educators or supplemental educators that were there who weren't teachers, but they were people who were very important to my development growing up. I also had those supplemental educators of color, Black and brown folks at Christina Cultural Arts Center, and those types of experiences really informed me that I wanted to go into something like that to help, to educate. Schooling is just one form of education. And I think that it's important that we really think about that, because sometimes kids don't, especially if we're talking about Black and brown boys, don't have a good opportunity experience in schools, but they might have great experiences in out of school time programs that can be educational context. You know, I was a camp counselor, I was a camper, you know, I was in all kinds of bands and all kinds of activities that really formulated and formed my development growing up. So I think it's important that we think about that. And when I went to school, at college up in Massachusetts, I knew I wanted to be an educator. I didn't know if I wanted to be an elementary educator, a middle school teacher, high school teacher. And I think that, you know, I really settled in on something that was where I could make my passion for helping people, helping young people, and also, you know, the curriculum that interests me the most, which was English. And that's kind of how I got into teaching, was being inspired in those out of school time programs, more so than my own schooling. So I wanted to put that out there as a different kind of frame.
Appreciate that. You know, as you were talking, you know, I thought about sort of my own why about becoming an educator. And similarly, this was not something that I aspired to be from a young age. You know, I knew I wanted to be in the helping profession. I knew I wanted to give back, you know, to kids that look like me. But unfortunately, you know, when we think about some of the barriers that keep people that look like us out of the classroom, you know, oftentimes when we look around in these teacher ed programs, we don't see many people that look like us. So, you know, I think some of the other brothers were ready to chime in on their teacher story. So I want to give you an opportunity to do that. But when we think about that, you know, I want you to leverage some of those ideas as you think about why more of our brothers don't think about education as a career.
Yeah, you touched on it, Jack. And you know, I was listening to all the brothers that spoke before me, and one of the things that I think about my entrance into the classroom was completely by accident. I didn't even know that, you know, when I think about my entire K-12 career, fantastic educators that I was surrounded by. However, I can think about, I had one black male educator, and that I met him when I was, you know, coming through the end of my undergraduate program. And when I found out about that teaching was even an option, I was a political science and economics major, and I found out I was in an ad policy course, and we're talking about, you know, the opportunities gap and all of these things that are going on. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of this. You know, this doesn't make any sense. And the more I started to lean in, I was just so, you know, compelled that, like, look, I don't know if I want to go down to the registrar's office and switch my major and give the university any more money. I thought that's what I had to do. Had no idea there was alternative routes to certification to get me into the classroom. And so that changed my entire perspective through the LSATs to the SAT. I would be honest with everybody here, I was tired of studying for that thing anyway. But it was a really good opportunity for me to realize that, like, this is my calling. And then the fast forward, when I got to graduation and we were calling all of the education majors' names, you know, I went to a pretty large university, and out of all of the graduates, there was one black male who walked across that stage. No Latinx individuals, none. It was one black male of color, and that just blew my mind. And so it really spoke around the barriers and the act as to who we are highlighting to actually welcome or be shepherded into the profession, because the outreach in terms of what others were receiving, I was not seeing that on the same side for us.
We'd love to hear from you, Brother Omar. Why did you decide to teach?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and it's a great question. I'm sure we've asked each other that question many times privately to ourselves. For me, simply, there's just not enough representation. There's not enough teachers who look like me, who I aspired to be growing up. I had great connections with teachers throughout my life, and they inspired me to be the best version of myself. And that's what I feel is important for me in being able to give back, is to inspire other young children who are underrepresented, disenfranchised, to seek to help, to allow me to help them seek their full potential. I want to be able, just to help them break free from those barriers that are holding them back, and ultimately just let them soar. I didn't see my first educator of color until middle school, Mr. Baldwin. We always talked about football. So I instantly made a huge connection with him, and it seemed like all educators of color, I was instantly, had a tight connection with them. Many times they were my coaches, so it was kind of, and I'm a sports guy. That's why I'm a physical education major. So for my educators of color, it was always a strong connection that I had with them. I didn't see my first Latinx educator until I was in high school, Mr. Robledo, and he was soccer coach as well. So there was just not enough of us that were in the profession, and I believe it's definitely time that stigma changes a little bit.
So we've heard a couple of points come up about the reasons that you decided to enter this noble profession. From the folks that were around you growing up, whether they were teachers, formal teachers or not, to just wanting to improve your community. And when we think about the barriers, that keep other Black and Latino men from considering the profession of education as a career, some of the things that I'm drawn to, and I have some of these conversations with folks that are not educators. And, one of the things that they always say is, how do you expect people to become teachers when you don't pay them enough? Like, how are you going to do anything about changing the reality of the profession and who you're trying to recruit if you're not paying people enough? Like, you're never going to do it, right? Is the conversation that I have sometimes. So in your opinion, what's keeping more brothers that look like us from considering this as a profession?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Jack. And I think often now as a superintendent, that's the first thing that people actually want to throw out there is the quote unquote perception of the money that I make in my job relative to the influence and the impact that we have on really changing and building systems. But I think that starts early on, whether that's the barriers that we perceive to be in education or that idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy that you can't be what you don't see, or you won't become what you can't see. And so when we look at what's perpetuated to young men of color, just in terms of what are the monikers of success, what do we point to? We point to athletes, we point to entertainment, we point to other fields, or doctors, lawyers, things that we perceive to be tied to money and outcome of success rather than the influence and ability to actually change systems. And so for me, I think we have to unpack the economics of education and the profession, in terms of the ability to develop an entrepreneur spirit. I mean, I know a number of Black educators who have been able to capitalize on the fact that they're educators and parlay that into other areas. But we have to take a holistic approach and not allow that self-fulfilling prophecy of what the media tends to perpetuate as success for Black men to minimize what we're able to do in education. And that starts with us actually sitting down with young men in schools at an earlier age, and ensuring that our educators are in that space to engage and mentor and fellowship and see that success as an educator, and not something that gets minimized or, woe is me or the work is hard. Because I think that in essence creates boundaries and barriers in the minds of young men. That why would I want to be in education? One, if I don't see educators who look like me, but more importantly, the ones who do look like me don't necessarily perpetuate or promote what the society is selling as images of success.
And I would like to add just the actual experience, right? I think I know several Black and brown students have experienced a punitive experience in education. So why would you want to go and teach, make a profession out of an environment that has constantly looked at you as being, the bad student, or, looked at you as just an athlete? So I think what we need to do is to start early, right? Like start early and provide our kids with a positive experience. I'm glad you brothers name dropped early, and I didn't do that. But I speak to Mrs. Conquest at Kirk Middle School and Mr. Ogechi at Christiana High School. They provided me with the blueprint on what excellent teaching looks like, and they also provided a positive experience for me, and that encouraged me to get into the profession. So I think what we need to do is really sit and listen to our kids, really listen to our kids, talk to them about their experience, talk to them about what they want to be, and then create that experience, that environment that will encourage them to get into education. Because again, if you see plenty of kids that look like you in detention being suspended, you're not going to want to be a part of that type of profession.
I just want to add just a few things. I think, a lot of the issues that Dorel and Shanta have already brought up are absolutely relevant. Why on earth would a Black boy, who had a terrible experience in school want to make a career out of working in schools? So I think that that is one of the most foundational things is we need to create school climates where Black boys feel like they matter, where they feel like they are important, where they can belong, and that they form strong attachments so that they can form strong attachments to their learning, so that they'll form strong attachments to wanting to be someone who facilitates the learning of others. It's like, that's the first thing I think is important. The second thing is that, and we need to really consider this, is the hyper-feminization of teaching, which happened probably about 70 years ago. The tables turned. Teaching used to be a predominantly male profession, particularly in the secondary levels, middle and high school, the equivalent. But once women became more active in that, it became one of those things where boys started to not see themselves in those roles. So I think that there's that. I don't blame women for this at all. Please don't misunderstand me. But there is this feminized notion of teaching that has not widened spaces for boys to see themselves in those roles. That is not a problem of the profession. That's a problem of our society. The first thing that we do when girls are born is we hand them a doll. The first thing that when boys are born, boys, I'm talking gender, not sex, is that they are given something to fix, something to undo, something to tear apart, something to build back together. And I think that we wonder why boys aren't nurtured to think about care and taking care of people. And then we wonder why there's no men in the fields, because we don't socialize boys to be caregivers. And I think that one of the things that happened for me early on was that I was given the opportunity to be in programs where I saw a lot of amazing men who showed up mightily in the lives of boys that were just like me. So I immediately was able to say, well, I can take care of kids. I could do that because that was modeled for me in many ways. And I think that a lot of boys don't have that opportunity. And I think that the last barrier that I'll speak on, this is something that's a little bit more technical, is that there's a lot of barriers to get into teacher ed programs. To get into teacher ed programs, you have to do well in high school, go to a college that has a teacher ed program. Teacher ed is not always what we call a found major. You don't really always fall into teaching. That's something you have to kind of seek out. There's paperwork you got to deal with. And you got to do all these requirements, and you have to get a standardized assessment sorted out. And a lot of those types of assessments and those types of barriers are things that Black men have difficulty navigating on college campuses. So I think that that's another important thing to think about. Is the barriers to just becoming a teacher technically on college campuses. So I think your point was really well taken, this notion of these alt programs that are important to bolster up too.
I just want to lift up some of the themes that I've heard in your answers to this question. And one of the biggest ones is this idea of returning to the scene of a crime or the scene or where trauma took place. When we talk about the experiences that many of our kids have within the school walls and the reasons that they don't ever want to come back once they leave. So this idea of creating the type of nurturing environments that our children need in the first place in order to make education, teaching, something that they want to contribute to. I don't think that's a point that should be minimized on any level. And, this idea about the making the pathway to education seem more realistic for folks is something that I think we also need to spend some time on. Definitely hits home for me. When I was an undergrad, I was enrolled in the education preparation program for about a semester. And it was well into that semester when I began, when work started to pile up and I started to wonder, how am I going to navigate X, Y, and Z? And when I looked around to where the supports were supposed to be and not seeing anybody that remotely looked like me or came from where I came from, I felt like I was never going to get out. So if I wanted to graduate, I needed to change my major, which I did at the time. So I think the other thing that we have to talk about here is facilitating mentorship and pathways in these programs so that there is a real cohort experience so people feel supported. I know that we also understand that there are alternative route programs that are out there as well for folks that may not have decided they wanted to be a teacher during their undergraduate time, but there is still an opportunity to do that. I think we need to make that option more available to folks, let them know that is there. As we talk more about this idea about bringing more brothers into the profession and how do we navigate that, I just want to make sure that we're clear about what some of these methods look like. So I just want us to unpack how we, for lack of a better term, fix this problem that we're having with getting more of our men to consider the profession. I mean, we've talked a lot about the reasons why they don't, but let's talk a little bit more about the ways that we can fix it.
Yeah, it's one that I always think about constantly in my head. And everyone's touched on this in a way around here. It's like, what is the narrative? How are we, again, talking about the profession itself? And so if we want to reach, more Black and brown men, it really comes down to, and I want to rewind for a second. I really don't think the problem is finding brothers. I've been in a number of different webinars, even thinking about this year. If you think about it, it's been a year since we've, went into this new normal of being on our laptops and all these things. And I remember a few Zoom webinars and get-togethers that were hosted by a number of different groups, folks wanting to learn about the profession, and saw so many eager men who were interested in, doing this from all around the country. However, one thing that kept coming up with some of those barriers, and so a couple of the things to get around those barriers are, how do we take on some of the, for example, GPA requirements that may be, keeping folks from entering the profession. I know there was a standard at times when they wanted to see the 3.0, but again, that doesn't take into account, much of the resilience that individual may have made it through their undergraduate or graduate career from. And so like I think about when we talk about we want to identify and bring these individuals in, we need to start changing what's keeping them out. So we know that the GPA, also, looking around when I think about the sustainment piece, because you can't talk about recruitment without connecting it back towards the sustainment of educators in a building. And so if, we know that many of us, some of our districts and, individual campuses are struggling with that. So again, that's a great way for us to start to highlight folks who are already doing the work, whether it's administrators, teachers, who've been there, a couple of years, and, highlighting and bringing them in. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I could see someone else if I'm, going through the recruitment, identify, looks a bit like me, been around for a minute or, is on the way here. And we get a chance to start to build that cohort and that mentorship that comes, which is paramount to being there. Because again, keeping it honest, there may not be, when you think about campuses, you may be placing someone in a campus for the very first time. They may have not seen a Black or brown educator, male educator in that building. So then the other thing I always like to think about, how are we preparing each and every single teacher in the district, each and every single staff member in our institutions to be ready to welcome and bring these things on. And so really thinking through, the barriers we have in place, but also making sure that the individuals, the ecosystem itself, that we are all a part of it, and make sure everyone else is having the same conversations around those systemic issues that they have, so that when you do get that brother who ends up at a campus, they don't face a lot of those things that I think many of us may have found ourselves on at some point in our teaching career.
Just to piggyback off of what Mr. Blackwell was just speaking on, there is a lot of systemic issues. There is a lot of barriers. So what I can speak on right now is the Latinx, the Hispanic, the Dreamer experience. So like myself, like many others, I am a dreamer. So for me to come into this profession is not something that is typically done. Typically, as a first-generation immigrant myself, we are conditioned to come to this country to talk, more so to come into this country to work hard, work 60 hours a week, hard manual labor, simply because we come from a broken country, grew up poor, and we just know one thing, and that's one thing only, and that is to work. We don't typically see past that. Nothing wrong with hard manual labor. It's something that I'm very grateful for. All my family, I have a lot of family that does that. However, we do need to start branching out. And currently, there's only 15,000 DACA students who, not students, but educators now. There are 15,000 DACA educators, and there's almost 1 million of us. So the numbers are rising, but they are not where they need to be, simply because of the barriers that we face growing up. For instance, here in North Carolina, I love my state. However, it is not Hispanic, it is not Latinx, it is not dreamer friendly. I had to actually go to a different state to continue and pursue my education, simply because I have lived here my entire life. Due to legal status, I was not able to get in-state tuition, so they were charging me out-of-state tuition in my own home state. You can see how the barriers continue to rise there. Students typically will want to drop out because they see no need in continuing in education, simply because in-state tuition is non-existent for us. We have to pay out of state. We have to travel to a different state to continue our education. There's so many barriers that stop us. You have to be good test takers, for one. Your English should not be broken, too. And the list goes on. I can just keep on and on as to why Hispanic, Latinx educators and brown educators are not seen in the classroom. I hope that, through time, although education, I hate that it has to be political, it is most definitely political. And we must rally around the support of educating people who want to be in this field to progress, to build it up, and ultimately recruit and retain more educators who are brown, who are black, who come to the profession seeking what their ultimate goal is in life, and helping others understand their purpose as well. And again, I'm kind of getting a little bit off topic, but I know the barriers are there. The systemic issues, the underlying causes are definitely still consistent within the education community right now. So there's a lot of things that need to be worked on, but I hope that through educating, through dialogue and conversation, we can again continue to change the narrative for our people.
Brother Omar, you couldn't be more on topic. So you are not off topic at all, and you're bringing up the various barriers. I just want to take a quick second to welcome Brother Wade. Brother Wade and Brother Omar are the true superstars tonight. For those of you that don't know, Brother Omar is a current teacher. He's teaching in North Carolina, and Wade is an aspiring teacher. He's currently in an undergraduate program. So they are the true stars here tonight. So, Brother Wade, we know you were having some technical difficulties. It's hard for a student out there. We understand, brother. We love you. We're supporting you. But we want to welcome you into the conversation. And, You know, we covered so far like why brothers decided to teach, and where we were just talking about why there aren't more. So you, as a current undergraduate student pursuing an education degree, why don't you think more of your brothers and sisters are considering this profession like you are? What's keeping them out?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So first I want to say I didn't have my first black male teacher, professor or teacher, whatever you want to say, until I was a freshman in college. Like there were no black male teachers other than my father and my mother. They were the only black teachers I saw really growing up. But to answer your question, I feel like it's because people want to, people say that you can make more money doing this. You can go do a business. You can go do this. You can go do that. And there's a lot of young black men that feel like the school system has failed them. They feel like they should be out there doing something different, and teachers don't really care about them. I feel like that's partially because they don't see teachers that look like them. When you see teachers that, resemble you, or so a teacher that can look like your mom or your grandmother or your uncle, your aunt, somebody, you really want to pay attention in class, and you really want to get to work and help that teacher out, and that teacher wants to have that connection with you. So I feel like it's more so people just, they want to try something different because they feel like school failed them. So why would they go back and get back to a school that failed them? Instead, they want to put their time and effort into something else and try to make money. Like a lot of kids my age, I'm only 20 years old. A lot of kids my age, they talk about, starting their own business. They want to start their own business, and that's cool. I respect everyone's wishes they want to start their own business, but then they say stuff to me like, oh, why would you want to work for a school where they don't got nothing for you? Or you're a modern day slave because you don't want to have your own business. You want to work for somebody. And I feel like there's an issue and disconnect there, because for me personally, I want to work in a school because I want to show young kids and young black men and women to specifically that you can accomplish anything you want to. Like after I get my bachelor's, I'm gonna get my master's, and I'm gonna tell them, I'm gonna show them on my wall, like I did it, so why can't you? You can accomplish anything you want to do. You can go to school, you can go to high school, you can go to college, you can pursue your dreams. So I want to be an example for young black men and women to show them that you can do whatever you want to do, whether it's school, a sport, become a doc, whatever it is, you can go and achieve your dreams.
And Jack, just so I could jump in, Red Clay will be ready to hire Wade once he gets done with that undergrad and work with him to pursue that master's degree. So I'm putting my feelers out there right now. So look us up, Wade.
See, that's the way you do it. That's the way you do it.
That's right.
So,
and not the battle here, but Newcastle County Votech is also
look.
But I mean,
there you go.
But that speaks to the solution, right? I think we often talk about things, but we don't back it with action. For instance, offering positions, right? And even if we don't have a position within our district, or that person didn't get hired in our district, opening up the network. So, hey, you know what? We're not hiring in Newcastle County Votech, but in Red Clay, I know some folks that I can reach out to that they may have the perfect position for you. So, I think even starting early, I think we start too late. We wait until college when we should really be promoting the field in high school, and really encouraging our kids in the summertime, having small internships for them to work around educators. And then from there, when they're home from college, get them a job, and bring them in as a substitute. And even if we want to go full stream, full impact, let's try to pay for their education, and bring them back and say, you know what, we're going to commit to you. We're going to invest in you. And it may not happen in my district, but in Red Clay and Colonial and Apple, there's a spot for you. And the network is that large that we're providing opportunity and we're not competing. So I think what we need to do is just, again, back it with action and not with words, and invest with money, invest with time, invest in building a network. And then as far as retaining, making sure that we're keeping the lines of communication open, that we're mentoring these young teachers coming in, and that we're not just doing it within the district, but we have a full-blown network in Delaware that's nurturing these future educators. So I think it speaks to the solution, and I'm glad Superintendent Green brought it up.
And I would just go, and Wade touched on one thing that's actually been, we can't typecast ourselves when we get into education to be the disciplinarian either, or the one who is seen as the punitive person who is going to replace the assumption that every black man or young black man doesn't have a father in their life. So you being a black educator, that's the role that you need to serve within our school, because I was there as well. And that's a lot of pressure, being the only educator of color, especially black male educator of color, when people have that expectation that you alone are going to change the dynamic for so many based on assumptions or prejudices or biases that they assume. And so a lot of that has to be that broader community connection, to Wade's point, to change that mindset so that young people see education as a viable option that they can go into and earn a living, right? But also have impact. And you can still start your business. You can still become that entrepreneur. You get your summers off, so to speak. So there are so many ways to teach the economics of education to help folks mobilize and capitalize on it. But when we're in it and we talk about retention, I've known too many educators that have gotten burnt out as a result of the pressure of being isolated in a space where you're expected to be the sole change maker for students because my colleagues didn't look like me. I remember my first teaching experience, for those that know, in Delaware, the September 30th count. I went to teach 6th grade when my colleagues were able to kind of divide their classroom up for the new teacher. And guess what my demographic of my classroom looked like? Basically, everyone that was deemed a problem in everybody else's class. And so I had to do a lot of hard work to just foster relationships and change minds and attitudes. And it wasn't until I actually left that particular school that I had my principal at that time then invested in me with instruction, because my previous school just saw me as a quote unquote pseudo disciplinarian rather than an instructional leader. And so we got to be mindful of the position that we place educators in. And when we talk about retention, we have to really look at the network that Shanta talked about, but also the ongoing professional development, professional learning that we need to stay engaged while we're in the profession.
I just want to jump in right there on that point, just real quick. We've been talking quite a bit about the recruitment, but also the retention piece that Superintendent Green just hit on is very important. And I think that one of the first things that we need to think about is that the challenges that a lot of we have for keeping Black men and brown men in the classroom is the same of all teachers keeping them in the classroom. Those induction years are so important to think about. How are we inducting them into the field? How are we keeping them there? But the thing that I really want to hit on is the ways that Black and brown bodies, particularly how Black and brown men are, and my colleagues like Ashley Woodson, Travis Bristol, Amber Pabon, there's a lot of researchers out here who are studying this phenomenon, particularly through the lens of how they are overworked and exploited. And that's what you just talked about, Superintendent Green, is this notion of once we get them in the buildings, what are we expecting them to do? What are we expecting them to do differently, particularly as a result of what they symbolize? And I think that that's really, really problematic. For instance, this notion of being a disciplinarian. When you are charged with being a disciplinarian, then you have to perform this hyper masculinity that might not be really who you are. And I think that that's really important to think about that. In a study I was reading about Latinx men, many of them are overworked and exploited for their language abilities, having to do 12 teacher conferences for children that aren't even in their classroom because they can speak Spanish. So there's different ways that this overwork and exploitation happens. And then, another thing is that they're supposed to be role models, for these Black boys, just in corrective discipline. So it's like you have to become almost over, in a building, and it's a tremendous amount of responsibility. So one thing I wanted to add just really quickly is that one way to get around this is that as Bristol's work has said, looking at when Black men are just one person in a building versus when they are in a cohort, or when it's like 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7 of them in a building, a very different experience. And I think that we can't just pick one. If you recruit Wade to go to that school, he needs to be there with other Black men who can support him, who can mentor him, so he doesn't have to perform Black maleness in a way that can isolate him further. So that's something else I wanted to throw out there.
Great points about the strength and support and cohorts. I want to raise the conversation up a level when we talk about who the responsibility is on to make some of these things happen. I saw a couple of comments in the chat about funding and how we make some of what we're talking about come to life through putting monies behind it. We have a new Secretary of Education, Latino brother that I know folks are expecting a lot from. We know that there's going to be monies that are going to be funneled towards recruiting more teachers of color nationally across the country. Certainly hoping that is something that is done strategically. But what is the role of these very white educator preparation programs? So when we think about Del State, when we think about UD, WilmU, Del Tech, what is their role in getting the candidates that the Black and brown candidates that need to be in their programs? What is their role to make that happen? What is the role of the legislative body to incentivize and invest? We keep bringing up this word investment. What does that investment need to look like by way of dollars?
A real, this is one of the ones I think about. I always like to step back from it. If you think about when we think about any other things that a IHE or a LEA might consider high priority. So if that is, math, redefining your program of study for math, or having this high recruitment initiative to diversify, the district, right? You see it in a couple of different ways, and it doesn't seem like when we're thinking through all these other high priority tasks, the leader or the decision is not so clear. It's very clear the steps that we need to take. It's only when we get to issues of equity or around supporting or recruiting educators of color, specifically Black and brown men, that we see this great confusion. Almost as if, we want to, not really sure. We want to pass the buck or not lean into some of those decisions. So what really needs to happen here is that there has to be clear leadership, and I'm not just talking about with the super or with the dean or with the board, but at all levels, and really have to make sure that we are all in this together, and that we have to make sure that the data and the data points that we have, we don't need too many studies to tell us what may be going wrong in our programs. We just at times just need to listen. So, I want to challenge that when we think about what could we do, what further, who that leadership decision sits with. I think obviously it starts at the top, but also, do we feel it? If I was to talk with anyone at any level in your organization, are we all in tune to this? Or am I saying, no, that's to the chief equity officer? No, that's the job of the curriculum director who's leading that revision. Are we all talking about this? And so that's one of the things I always want us to lean in and we have clear alignment on everything else. We need to have clear alignment and true institutional resources allocated. And that starts at the top, but again, making sure that each person in your organization is also following through.
And I would just say, again, we need to start early and look at college and affordability as well. I'm the first to go to college in my family, and had it not been the opportunity of me being afforded a scholarship, I don't know if obviously college would have even been an option, let alone, having the blessing of having folks kind of steer me into education. And so when we talk about creating, pathways and pipelines, and we talk about our IHEs, it's really looking at how do they work with us. We have the beauty of having Delaware Teachers Academy, but how many young people are we actually staring into the Teachers Academy, but then also making college affordable through dual credit programs and such, where I'm graduating high school prepared to go into a teacher prep program, and it's not going to take me 6 to 8 years to finish to get to that program with debt, and then look at the fact that a teacher salary in essence won't even help get me out of that hole that I had to secure to secure that degree. And so working with our IHEs to make that affordable. Again, I'm from the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. My niece just graduated high school. She's the second since I was able to go to college to now go to college. But she graduated high school with 60 dual credits, an associate's degree. And, so we need to be innovative about and intentional about building not only the pipeline, but then going back to what Roderick and many others said about that idea of retention, so that we can keep folks in the profession, but also grow others while we're in there and catch them while they're young, so that they don't have to go and become ARTC certified or go to another career path and then navigate and finding ways back into education. Not that that's a problem, but we have enough research, we have enough fortitude to know that as we work with our IHEs, we can tear down some of these barriers around requirements, standardization of tests and assessments, and really help people look at residency programs, such as what we're doing in Red Clay, really looking at the nature of a teacher resident, so that we're putting people in position to be successful rather than putting them in a position to fail and setting them up for failure and wonder why folks either aren't enticed to get into the field or, more importantly, leave within the first 2 to 3 years and becoming an educator.
Thank you for those jewels, Darrell. So we need to hold these education preparation programs accountable. They need to set goals around diversifying their programs, and we need to expect them to meet those goals, right? As of 2018, there was less than 30% of teachers of color in these ed prep programs. So if we're looking at numbers like that right now, we can't expect this field to become, we can't expect the numbers of Black and brown teachers to increase overnight if the funnel, if the pipeline is not turned on. And right now it's not turned on, right? So, this point about being able to talk to kids earlier to get them excited about the profession, right, is an important one. We talked about, we know that there are high school academies in Delaware, and there's actually a significant amount of kids of color in these high school academies right now, right? But will they stay there? Will they receive the support to stay there and see it through? That's going to be up to, educators, current educators and leaders providing the environments that are going to be supportive enough, right? And it goes back to this retention point that I hope we don't lose, that we have to support our current educators in a way that we're having race conversation often in schools, because we're not talking about it enough, right? Race, implicit bias. We're not talking about it enough. We're not having those difficult conversations enough. We have to make sure that folks feel like they can be developed, right, in schools. So the type of professional development that we are steering our Black and brown teachers to has to be those that are going to help them grow and become better educators, right? We talked about this disciplinarian sort of or linguistic, sort of trap that some of our people fall into. So there's a lot of things we need to keep at the forefront. Brothers, I know that there's a lot of questions coming through on the chat, and we appreciate the folks out there that have been patient, that have allowed us to engage in this conversation. Sister Shelly, I want to create some space so that we can hear from the people that have joined us tonight, so that the brothers can respond to some of the things that we're hearing. So, Sister Shelly, I'll take your direction in how we want to pull out some of these great questions and conversation from the chat.
Wow. Yes. Thank you, Jack. What a rich discussion. So much territory we've covered, so much we need to continue still. And oh boy, participants, how did you enjoy that discussion? Show some love to our panelists in the chat. You already are showing that love. Each of you is worthy of a session all by yourself. I was behind the curtain and clapping and screaming. Each of you could run the session all by yourself. And I want to say before we go over to the chat, this matters for all children. It is urgent for Black and brown children. It matters for all children. We know the impact for Black and brown children, but this is important for all children. Going through birth through K-12 experience without the experience of educators like this, we have to flip this. And couldn't be more proud of Wade, current Proud Hornet, and Omar, a recent graduate, earning his MED to teach English to speakers of other languages. And I was just a proud moment behind the curtain. Hornets are amazing. I'm going to turn things over to you, Lynn, in a minute. I do know a comment was raised about losing a generation if we don't act now, and I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to talk about, yes, recruiting is not enough right now. The issue is urgent. If you have been inspired, know that there are ways to come into this profession. Jack, you talked about this. DSU is actually starting an alternative routes master's program for career changers in the fall. You have TNTP. There are, when you're feeling that inspiration, let's keep talking, right? There are those strategies for immediate impact, and at the same time, having programs that will help us in the long game as well. So, Ms. Howard, what questions and insights do we have that you want to share from the chat area?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you again for this conversation. I wish we could go on for another hour because I think we feel like we're just getting started. But we had some great questions, and I'll just dive into those. So one is, how can we use our Delaware Teacher Academy programs and CTE education programs to encourage students of color to enter the profession? For anybody.
Yeah, so I think two things. One, when we look at the Delaware Teachers Academy, there are two tracks within that. It's the early childhood, and then also, the K-12. And I think a lot of times we'll look at the short term and really divert people to early childhood, and rather than really looking at, and that's why I'm saying we have to partner with our IHEs to really, again, make college affordable. Because a lot of our students who might go into that Teachers Academy program and really looking at opportunities through dual credit or dual enrollment. We say dual enrollment, but I think it's dual credit because it should also suffice for my high school diploma as well as earned college credits, right, to help us get into that profession a little earlier. Similar to how Early College Academy is structured for students and working with Del State, why couldn't we structure a program similar to that for students who are truly interested in Teachers Academy and invest in them young and early? And so that whole idea of income and earning potential and all of those other aspects are things that we can address on the front end, and making sure that we're growing our own truly to be able to have a pipeline of Black and Brown and Latinx and Hispanic, educators within our state, because otherwise folks leave. And I think that's a big part of what we see. The limited number of educators within those programs are leaving. And so we have to do a better job of recruiting in high school for our Teacher Academies program.
If I could add on to Darrell's comments, we know that there's great diversity in the Teacher Academies. It's a great resource that we have. The students are very diverse. The teachers are not as diverse in those academies. And so another thing that's worth mentioning is teachers, if you are listening, those teachers in the academy, we need you to find innovative ways. That's what teachers do, to bring that diversity to those academy students. It matters. And then we also need to be thinking about more diversity amongst those teachers as those opportunities open up. But that is key. It's also key that we are starting these conversations before high school. I know when I would visit all up and down the state, you would hear the young people talk about being a teacher, but by the time they get to middle school, the things that they're talking about, in terms of their careers was changing with children of color. And you no longer heard them talking about being a teacher. We have to do something early on. And that's why part of our DSU strategy is going to be having our talented teachers like Omar and Wade and so many more get into those classrooms and be that inspiration. Start seeding that. Let those little people see that Black and Brown men are educating or can educate you. Imagine what we're doing with young people never having the experience of having a Black or Brown educator, or never having a Black or Brown male teach them. What kind of subliminal things that is planting in them at that young age? It has to be undone. So there's when it comes to those academies, we have to get innovative. We can't just throw our hands up. We need we have the creativity to think through it, and it's time to do it.
And Shelly, just to add to that, and having probably the best early childhood program in the state, and we have a teacher, Mrs. Bell, who is not Black or Brown, but she speaks to the issues. And that's important when our students are going through and they're rotating through their career areas, that they're hearing about diversity, they're hearing about inclusion, they're hearing about equity, And she makes it very clear on what it means to be an educator that teaches all kids. And I think that's important. And the other piece, she stays with her kids, right? Our kids. When they graduate, she is constantly checking in and making sure that they have what they need when they're in college. And then when it's time for them to leave, she's coaching them up, for the next opportunity. And just spoke to her last week, and 2 of her students are now nominated for Teacher of the Year. So that's what good teachers do. They speak to the issues, but also they stay connected to their students to make sure that those barriers that they will encounter at the next level, there's someone there to talk to.
Thank you.
Hey, real quick, just to add on to that. So
yes, please. Please.
But I have a professor here at Delaware State University, and he's not Black or brown. His name is Dr. Martin, and he makes sure that all his students are on top of their stuff and making sure they're understanding the information he's given us, and he's checking in on us. And if you miss an assignment, he's like, "Hey, did you understand this, or do you need any help with this, or call me, text, whatever." Like he's on top of it. And I know I've only been in this program this is going to be my second semester in it. But even in my first semester, he was making sure that I understood everything. He's talking to all his students, whether you're Black, brown, white, whatever, it doesn't matter. He truly cares for his students, and that's what type of teachers that we need to make a difference and going forward.
Thank you, Wade.
It's an important point. White educators, there is a role for you to play in contributing to this effort, right? We need you to create and sustain the supportive environments that Black and brown aspiring educators, students need to be successful, right? Remember that our Black and brown students are primarily taught by white teachers, right? So if we want these Black and brown students to think about being teachers, it's going to be incumbent upon these white educators to create supportive environments that will foster that. So I'm glad to hear that from Shanta and from Wade and Omar, looked like you were also supporting, that there are some white educators that you guys have been supported by, and we know that they are out there. We need more of you to step up.
Okay, we have from another viewer mentioned that mentoring and support groups are vital for retention. Are such groups available in Delaware, to the knowledge of anyone with us tonight? Mentoring
the question
for Black teachers? Yeah.
Programs for retention?
Mentoring for and support groups are vital for retention of Black male teachers. Are any such groups available?
And I'm
not aware of any such groups. I don't know if Darrell, what were you going to add?
I was going to say nothing in the formal sense outside of the general new teacher mentoring program that, again, may not necessarily be a educator of color serving as their mentor. It's something that we've actually started to have some honest dialogue and discussion with as I make it about schools. And there's one educator in particular. He's a kindergarten teacher, a Black male, and he's a unicorn. First off, he's an educator who is teaching kindergarten as a Black male, and then he's a Black male teaching kindergarten. And the isolation that I know this educator feels, and when I'm in the building, I make it a point to just go check on him, and I'm due for a check-in with him soon. But really creating that network and just creating this space that we've had tonight to be able to dialogue, and for me to see Shanta on here, for me to see Ernest and Rod and Omar. Seeing Omar literally drive from home to go to class to participate in this, like literally is what I needed after a long day today to realize that that's a part of our purpose, and hearing his story. And then lastly, seeing Wade, who is full of life and hope and all the things that we want to pour into education. So it's going to behoove and compel me once to leave here to be intentional about not just checking in on one, periodically, but formalizing the program where, our Black male educators can have this space to just simply dialogue and be.
And I think that's why it's important too to have it a statewide type of approach, right? Because to the point that was made earlier, only 2% African American males are in the field. So if we were to unite and create a network where kindergarten teachers talk to other kindergarten teachers that look like them, then it only expands the power and the impact that we have with making sure that our teachers are successful. So I would love to look at something even obviously at the district level, but also expanding at the state level so that folks can be properly mentored.
And I will say, Delaware State University, I alluded to this earlier, but I'm happy to see this. We have a plan that is underway this semester. We are building a plan that's focused on the levels all the way from elementary school all the way past their graduation at DSU to in their beginning years in the profession. And so this is something Dr. Ordner Taylor and Dr. Stephen Franklin are building that program as we speak. We will be engaging with all of you and those in districts. So Shanta, Darrell, happy to reach out to you and other districts to see how we can have something like this that we spearhead, but that can be more expansive. But this is something that we have given a lot of thought to for our students. The role that they can play in elementary schools to start building that inspiration at a young age, but also the role we owe them as they are in the beginning years of the profession to have that support system in place in addition to the supports they have from their districts. So districts, if you want to partner on having that be something a little more widespread, we are ready to work with you. Other questions?
Local universities no longer offer discounts for teacher tuition. Do you think that this would help in recruitment of Black males to the profession?
That always helps.
Oh, yeah.
That and so much more, right?
Yeah,
We've got to
recognizing that there's already a big barrier to cost there. Scholarships, exhausting all public and private resources, because if we're really saying, this is an issue, we want to address this, we got to lean in and fund it. And so I think there have been some great models that have been, created, from a number of different organizations around specifically recruitment of Black educators and Latinx educators to the profession. One guiding, similarity that you'll find is that there is some rather full or partial financial assistance that assists all of those programs. So, again, that's just one small issue, but at minimum, we should be really looking at, okay, if we want them, let's make sure that once we find them, we can get them in here without any barrier to cost.
And that tuition reimbursement is a retention strategy, because that tuition reimbursement is something that has those Black and brown male educators in the field who are continuing their degree to have that reimbursement and continue and stay in this profession and stay as a teacher. Some move on to other things just because of, so keep them as a teacher as long as they want to stay in the classroom. But that reimbursement allows them to get those advanced degrees and continue to pour them into our children. So really big deal. And so many other things that will be needed too. Other questions?
We know what the barriers are, right? They're tuition, financial, right? They're the GPA requirements, right? Which, along with certification requirements that don't correlate to performance oftentimes. So when we're talking about the ways in which we evaluate what good teaching is and what the bar is for those that can enter the profession, we need to rethink these performative tasks that keep people out of the profession. So there are more and more studies that are showing that these certification tests are not accurate measures of performance. And we know that we do know that they're keeping more Black and brown people out of the profession. So we need to be doing something about that. We need to be advocating for change at the legislative level.
Well, that ties on to another question that was asked on how can teachers be supported in passing the praxis?
I can kind of chime into that one and just kind of boast about my alma mater for a little bit. Delaware State University is just amazing, first of all. And it's because of awesome people like Dr. Rouser, Dr. Bob Martin, who are there for the students, their success. Currently, right now, Delaware State, they do have it to where students can take the praxis exam free of charge, first and second time if they show progress. So that in itself is a huge help in getting these college students being able to pass the exam. I mean, let's face it, college students don't come to school with a lot of money, especially, you know, and where we're at. So that is a huge help. And I would just like to take a personal moment to just thank Delaware State and the people that made it happen, to give them thanks for all of that. But I agree. And I was part of a different conference where this topic came up. How are other universities helping aspiring educators pass certification, you know, get their state license, pass praxis. Praxis is our worst nightmare, especially for aspiring educators of color who are not good test takers. And it more so focuses on white educators who are conditioned, you know, more so to take these exams, pass it, and go on to the next level. I learned that Delaware State is one of the only universities, I would say probably in the nation, that is doing this at the moment. So we're definitely leading the way. And I say we because Delaware State is a part of me now. Very happy, and that's why I'm also pursuing a graduate level degree there, just because it's been great to me. And the only way that I can, you know, repay it forward is to continue to support the university.
And Wade, I think you wanted to jump in. Please do.
Yeah, I didn't mean to talk when you
Go right ahead.
practice that, but yeah, speaking about being able to take the practice test, you're allowed to take it twice, a timed one and an untimed one, free of charge. And I took mine a couple weeks ago. Dr. Martin allowed his class, which I'm in, to take it, and it's a good feeling going into a test, knowing what you're supposed to look for, rather than, you know, you go through the 4 years and then you get one shot at it. And now it's like, oh, the stress from the overwhelming feeling of I have to get this test the first, or I can't be a teacher. And now it's like you've seen it, you're trained, and you develop the knowledge of what's going to be on the test, and it's in your brain. You've learned it, and you know it, and then you get time to practice it. And I feel like that's a huge thing, and so much stress relief. When you get to see what's on the test, and when you know what you're supposed to look for, and you know what you're supposed to do. And it just is a big shout out to DSU for helping their students out in that way, making it successful.
Thank you both for being here. You're paying it forward. That's what it's all about.
And Shelly, it just simply goes down to test prep. If race, and we know that it's a barrier, it's really helping that support to test prep, to prepare for what actually is on that exam, and not for it to be a surprise. And you get to the point where I've secured my degree, and now a test is actually withholding me from actually securing an opportunity or exiting me from the profession because I can't literally pass the test, but I can earn a degree. And so really creating the situation, once I've earned that degree, my praxis should not be a barrier for me. And, you know, what are we doing within that to make sure that test prep is a part of the teacher prep program to ensure that that barrier is not a limitation to, you know, getting educators of color into the profession.
Yep, absolutely.
And if it's not already happening, right, then UD, WilmU needs to find out what Del State is doing to support their students to take the test, because best believe there are Black and brown educators of color at UD, at WilmU, at Del Tech that need that same support. So are they going to see what Del State is doing so that they can support their students?
So there was a comment made that by a viewer that says, on a national level, to her, there's a problem in test design if there is a statistically significant bias in the outcomes. Thoughts?
I think that's our next session. Lynn, is there anything else that we want to pull from the, I think that's a little bit.
Just one last, I know we're running out of time. A viewer says, a generation of Black learners will be lost during the recruitment of Black teachers. What are some in the meanwhile strategies?
I want to jump in real quickly just to comment. The thing that I've been listening for is this notion of pathways. How do we get Black boys to become Black teenagers, to become Black men who go into the field of education? And it's interesting when you were saying they're not passing the praxis well. They're not doing remarkably well on the ACTs or the SATs. A lot of those tests are rooted in kind of racist tropes that kind of keep Black and brown people out of the realm of certain domains. So there's that anyway. So the project from the start is racist. But I do think that there's ways that we can resist, and I do think there's ways that we can overcome that in some ways. And it sounds like DSU has done some remarkable work in that. But I would say that losing the generation, I think that we can regain the generation. And I think that it starts with, teaching little boys to care, reminding them that they are caring beings who can go off and become people who professionally care for the lives of others. And that can be, coaching, mentoring, helping, being a professional helper, not even just being a teacher, but being a social worker, someone who is making our world better through interpersonal engagement. It's not just about making money. In my own research, a lot of the boys that I have studied with, and they're not interested in making a whole lot of money. A lot of those tropes are they're fake. They're not, they know they're not going to be living in a mansion like Jay-Z. They know that. But what in the meantime can they get? You can make a good living as an educator. There are career pathways. You don't have to just be a teacher. You can be a principal. You can be a superintendent. You can be in the district office. There's different types of jobs. You can be a professor. So I think that it's exposing people to not just being what it means to be a teacher, but a professional educator, a professional helper, someone who is in charge with caring for someone professionally. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
And talking about that short-term solution, I'll go back to, we have to think outside the box. It's about both and, not either or. And it is about also looking at the fact that if we're looking for the short-term wins, how are we going to get out there and encourage those who are listening right now and thinking, you know what, I've always wanted to be a teacher. How do we, at the same time that we have the traditional programs doing their thing, also bring those alternative routes and focus on Black and brown males and focus on having them all the way up from pre-K through the high school years, so that students are seeing that Black and brown male in front of them. And we have some short-term fixes that aren't placing a bet on 8th graders only or high school students only 4, 5, 10 years down the road. So it's both and, not either or. And I can't wait for the next conversation on this. Lynn, is there anything else pressing before we have some wrap up?
I think we can wrap up.
Oh my goodness, this was such a powerful session. Thank you for joining our third community series, Diversifying the Educator's Workforce. You can stay connected with us through visiting our webpage, Wilmington Center for Education Equity.com. Get involved with us. Your voice, your experience, your opinions matter to us. It's our mission to serve you and to create long-lasting change in our education system for our students. Like us on Instagram at WCEEP, follow us on Facebook, and for all upcoming events, you will be able to see those events in our Facebook page. You will be able to also find our social media handles in the chat box. April 19th forum is a community update on public education related to Delaware legislative bill and budget requests. Stay tuned for our next community series titled Restorative Practice, the Adultification of Black and Brown Children on Monday, May 6th. At 7 o'clock, same format. That will be curated by Shannon Griffin and also featuring author Dr. Abdul Malik Muhammad. Together, we can make long-lasting change that can propel our youth to become future leaders of tomorrow. Connect with us because your voice, your opinions, your experience matter to WCEEP. Thank you, Dr. Perry, and our panelists of educators. So inspiring. Thank you, Flux Consulting, for helping this run so smoothly and helping us with all the behind the scenes stuff that matters. And thank you all for participating with us this evening. Enjoy your evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you also.
All students benefit from a diverse group of teachers.
Did you know that research shows that when gifted and talented classes are taught by Black teachers, that Black students are much more likely to be assigned to those classes?
Educators of color also understand the importance of teaching their students about their racial identity and their history.
We need teachers that look like me. We need you.
We need you.
We need you.
We need you.